Alright, I got nothing to put on for the background. So enjoy some Dead by Daylight gameplay because I am a woman of class. Yes, these are the duality of my personality. Deal with it. Equestria girls did the main six dirty. And I mean it. Sure, everyone seems to love the cliche of high school girls in modern day media. I don't know why everyone latches onto that setting when they don't bother to utilize what it's actually like to be a teenager in their media, when college itself is right there, but I digress. I personally think Equestria Girls falls flat on a fundamental level. From the way we see the main six act in the alternate universe, it's clear that it's just a human bend in the pony world. Why this human world would downgrade a princess and 5 of her adult, fully independent friends into high school is beyond me. I get it, the cliche of high school, but come on. Really? You could have made a completely human twist on the main six and have some sort of plot about humans discovering ponies existing in an alternate magic-filled universe. Do you know how freaked out I would be if a pony version of myself strutted through a mirror? Yeah, I'd be panicking. So I'm going to redesign them. A totally original idea that I didn't steal from anyone else. I did decide a few rules for myself as I want to design them how I would approach writing an alternate human universe for a movie plot if I was the main writer. I want to tie the two worlds together, give them a reason for connection besides a single statue in the middle of the entryway. I also want to keep the characters similar to their core personalities in their pony forms, but give them a struggle that they are dealing with for some type of overarching plot. I'm going to keep the characters as adults and give them jobs closely resembling or mirroring their jobs from the pony world. It will be switching from a monarchy to a more presidential-driven country, since I feel like having them both as monarchies would remove the mystical wonder that Equestria has. I'm saying this as an American, by the way. The basic setting for the human world is pretty similar to ours. Everyone is human, dragons and talking ponies don't exist, and they carry a pretty typical life. However, their world is not completely void of magic. Cutie marks still exist. Instead of cutie marks being placed onto their thighs, I'm having them placed onto their face. I want the cutie marks to be rather prevalent in their day-to-day lives, as cutie marks are heavily important in this world. In Equestria, ponies seem to naturally know what their cutie marks mean, even if the symbol is nothing but 3 gems. What are you supposed to do with this rarity? How do you know this means that you're a fashion queen? There's likely an explanation in the show, but I haven't watched in ages, don't feel like rewatching it, and Google is simply too far away for me to ask how they know. Long story short, I'm throwing my headcanons into this. I like to imagine that them being ponies gives them a closer connection to magic and nature. So ponies just intrinsically understand what cutie marks mean since they have that connection. Humans, however, will not. I'm taking inspiration for this world from things like the Well of Wonder from Ever After High, where the magic from one world seeps into the other as a fuel source. In this world, I like to think that this imaginary connection between the two worlds fuels both of them. For the human world, they give tidbits of magic, connecting humans to their cutie marks and occasional magical energy that humans could capture and study. For Equestria, our world would supply the more grounded reality aspects of their world, like keeping gravity, the laws of physics, that sort of thing. Without their world, we would lose our sense of magic and creative sparks. And without our world, they would lose their sense of reality. Sort of a yin and yang, like the creative and logical parts of our brains. This is how I would approach writing these two worlds. That would allow for creatures like Discord to come into play, as I feel like Discord's existence could be entirely dependent on being detached from our world. Everyone from Equestria has a small connection to our universe, and the same for us, so creatures like Discord can only exist as they do if they have no semblance of physics or rules connected to them. His ultimate goal, before he became good, would probably be trying to sever this connection entirely. And this is how ponies would discover that connection. After Discord's Reign of Terror, he would have inadvertently led them to this weird portal in between the roots of an old forgotten tree. If you venture down into it, you would find a small tunnel, and crawling through that brings you to the other world. Since claustrophobia exists, not very many people would have dared to crawl through such a tight space. That's why it remained unknown until now. Circling back to the cutie marks, this connection to Equestria allows for humans to form cutie marks as well. However, since their connection to magic is weaker than ponies, the cutie marks would not form immediately after you discover your talent. Instead, the cutie mark would need several repeat actions with your special talent to be discovered, and this cutie mark would take about a month to grow in. This means that a good majority of the population wouldn't have cutie marks, and those who do would be manhandled into specialized schooling to figure out what exactly their cutie mark means and to master it. So now we have a precedent for what kind of world the human-made six would grow up in. We know how the ponies would have stumbled into the human world, And now we have a conflict for the two worlds to have. I won't be writing the conflict, as I'll just be focusing on the human world for the time being. Now it's finally time to get onto the characters. Twilight would have always had a close connection to magic ever since she was a little girl. I imagine that she grew quite close to the Everfree Forest, the forest housing the portal between the two worlds. As such, the forest is the most potent with magic and often has a few odd properties about it. Due to these properties, it's rather undocumented, as most technology doesn't seem to function in the forest. Twilight would have been one of the middle to develop her cutie mark out of the bunch. Parents aren't exactly inclined to leave their young daughter roaming a dangerous-looking forest, but once she grew older and more independent, she was able to start exploring. Due to this, she began to have experiences with her magic and began to develop her cutie mark when she tried studying it. Cutie marks about magic would be the most rare form of cutie mark. Coming into contact with magic is extremely difficult for most people to do, much less repeatedly. So other people who have had magic-focused cutie marks in the pony world simply wouldn't be able to find theirs in this world, which means that people like Twilight would have gotten tossed into the scientific program for magic studying right off the bat, despite her age. Twilight grew secluded due to this, and threw her whole life away to dedicate herself to the understanding of magic. She rarely got to see her parents or older brother, as studying magic could be dangerous and they weren't allowed to leave or have visitors very often. By the time Twilight grew to be an adult, her social relationships were tanked and she only ever spent time in the labs. Due to her dedication, however, Twilight would have become an alicorn. Obviously, for Equestria, this means getting wings, a horn, and becoming a princess. In this world, I want to approach it a little bit differently. Since magic is all but rare and worshipped, they wouldn't have become de facto leaders, but instead would have become almost mystical in a way. People who would unlock this level of connection with magic would literally become one in millions. For alicorns in this world, their progression would be their cutie mark forming on both sides of their face. Alicorns in this world wouldn't have any other abilities due to this, but would have a closer connection to magic and would be more easily able to sense magic nearby. Twilight would have been the youngest to unlock her double cutie mark, which would have all but cemented her role as the head scientist in the magic department. Alicorns in this world would likely be given more authority, and Twilight would start interacting with the other alicorns on a day-to-day basis. And this is where Celestia would recommend Twilight meet other people with cutie marks. She would disguise this as advice to expand her magical research to people with cutie marks not related to the studying of magic, but really this would have just been an attempt to make Twilight some friends. Twilight's overall arc would be much like it was in the beginning of the show. She'd be learning how to separate herself from her studies and learn how to make new friends. It would also be learning how to shake preconceived assumptions of people with useless cutie marks, like Rarity or Pinkie Pie. Twilight would have to learn how to become more open, friendly, and a better person. Twilight would also need to learn how to have more fun and would be quite naive for a lot of things like going to the mall or going to movies, which could humble her very quickly. Twilight would also have to deal with someone called Sunset Shimmer, an upcoming scientist who wants to learn magic. Due to the nature of this world, people without magic-focused cutie marks would not be allowed to interact with or study magic. Sunset Shimmer would obviously find this quite annoying, as she doesn't have a cutie mark at all, but is fascinated with magic and desperately wants to learn more about it. Overall, the plot would lead to Sunset Shimmer gaining a cutie mark in magic, which would reveal the nature of them and would lead to changes being made in the scientific program, allowing for people to study magic with a safe form of magic under supervision if they are interested. This would also lead to a whole new program dedicated to helping people discover their cutie marks, for which the Cutie Mark Crusaders would take over in the future. And that would be Twilight. She is one of the most similar to her pony counterpart for her arc, but I did want to intensify the social outcast she became. I based her hair design off of how I draw one of my own characters, as I find this kind of hairstyle rather appealing. I try to give her a combination of what outfit the show seemed to have going on for her, but also keep her scientist vibe going on. I think she's one of my least favorite human designs in the original movie. She just looks too weird to me. Pinkie Pie would have likely struggled the most out of the group. Her cutie mark is expressly about providing entertainment and joy to those around her, which I feel like Pinkie Pie would have done with ease from such a young age. As such, her cutie mark would have developed faster than most other people in this world, possibly one of the youngest ever to develop a cutie mark, which would have made Pinkie Pie onto national news almost instantly. However, trying to figure out what exactly her cutie mark is would cause her to struggle, especially with all the pressure the world would have put onto her. It doesn't help that her cutie mark is perceived as a useless one to have, which would have caused massive bouts of anxiety and imposter syndrome. Pinkie would constantly be second-guessing her actions and life choices due to the nature of her upbringing. I wouldn't write Pinkie as depressed, as while her family doesn't really understand her constant need to socialize and bring joy out to others, they would have supported her in full force. Due to Pinkie Pie's cutie mark being balloons, she would have joined the circus from a young age. She wasn't particularly good at tying balloons or making balloon animals though, more so average than the cutie mark talented. Pinkie Pie would practice these skills to improve her entertainment, of course, but there would still be that lingering anxiety that she wasn't being true to her talent, especially since people would often doubt how useful her cutie mark was. It became common for people to assume she was wasting her gift, which led to Pinkie Pie using clown makeup to cover it up whenever she went out for performances. Ultimately, Pinkie would have met Twilight due to a study being done regarding her cutie mark. Pinkie Pie's cutie mark is meant to symbolize her throwing parties and making others smile, but her self-doubt from the years begun to fester and caused Pinkie Pie to struggle truly being herself around others. The only time Pinkie Pie is truly open is on stage, covered in makeup and hidden by the clown outfits she wears. It's the only time she ever feels truly in her element. However, since Pinkie Pie's talent only comes on in these instances, no one has been able to pinpoint exactly what it is, and this would send Pinkie Pie to be studied by Twilight. Pinkie Pie and Twilight would butt heads at first, but Twilight would eventually see through the act and force Pinkie Pie to become more honest with herself. And conversely, Pinkie Pie would be the one who forces Twilight to open up and allow herself to make friends and have fun again. Opposites attract, as one would say. Pinkie Pie's story would be overcoming this self-doubt and expressing herself more, instead of constantly hiding behind a smile and allowing for herself to finally enjoy her cutie mark. The only reason I drew her with the cutie mark up close was for reference, as I imagined Pinkie Pie would cover it up with makeup or bandages just so others wouldn't comment on it. Especially since she's grown up with a pretty subdued family who works in a rock field, Pinkie Pie would be almost embarrassed by it, and wouldn't talk about her cutie mark much. When she would finally get comfortable with it, Pinkie Pie showing her cutie mark would display her character growth and acceptance with herself. That's Pinkie Pie. Her character would symbolize the learning of self-love and how people can hide difficulties behind smiles and jokes. Pinkie Pie would still be an outgoing, enthusiastic person, but her overflowing joy would be a cover she forces herself into to make people laugh and smile around her. When Pinkie Pie would finish her character arc, she would eventually take over as the ringmaster of the circus. She's a short queen, and we love her. Fluttershy grew up as a quiet kid in a quiet town with nothing much going on, until her mother develops a garden cutie mark and is whisked away from the town to be trained for caring for flowers. With her mom out of the house a lot, and with a dead-loading brother, Fluttershy tends to get a bit lonely. Since Fluttershy struggles with social interaction, her father decides to buy her a pet rabbit to give her something to do after school. 2 months after she gets her pet rabbit, Fluttershy gets her cutie mark. Fluttershy has the easiest time getting used to her cutie mark since it's rather straightforward. However, the issue with her cutie mark comes from the constant pressure people would place onto her. Being able to calm animals around her and pick up on their behavior more than other people is extremely useful. Fluttershy would have been forced to go to a large university and have to deal with constant crowds and professors pressuring her to pick a career useful for her cutie mark. Fluttershy wouldn't have one job, despite how much she wants to run a small animal clinic back in her hometown. Fluttershy would bounce around from job to job due to requests for her aid, like managing stressed animals in captivity or important sick animals. With her social anxiety, this pressure would have been amplified until Fluttershy completely ducks into her cutie mark to find comfort. A quick note. A headcanon of mine is that ponies are naturally closer to animals and can understand them because of their connection. However, as a human, Fluttershy would not have that connection. She would have to depend entirely on her observation skills. By the time the group would be meeting, Fluttershy would have entirely devolved to depending on animals for company. She wouldn't really go out and interact with people if she could help it. However, a request is put in for a presence by the magic community that she cannot turn down. Animals from the Everfree Forest have a closer connection to magic, and thus, when the portal opens more, there would be an increased amount of animals going rampant. In order to study this, Twilight would need to bring in someone on board who can manage animals, and thus Fluttershy would be called in. Fluttershy's arc would mostly revolve around her dependence on her cutie mark and her social anxiety. It would be pretty straightforward, much like how Fluttershy's repeated attempts to come over her social anxiety are in the show. Overall, she would be the most similar character to her pony counterpart, just with a more intense dependence on her cutie mark. And that's Fluttershy, definitely the most simple out of the cast. She would likely help keep Twilight quiet company and would help Pinkie Pie with her cutie mark acceptance, as Pinkie Pie would conversely help Fluttershy with talking to people. Overall, just a sweet, quiet girl who was told her worth depended a bit too much on her ability to manage animals, and it shows. Rainbow Dash was the latest to develop her cutie mark, but she always knew from a young age that she wanted to fly. Ever since Rainbow Dash could remember, she loved watching old documentaries from her father's collection about flying. Be it planes or jets, Rainbow Dash has grown to adore them. Rainbow Dash picked up a plethora of hobbies in school, joining all sorts of sports and barely getting by on grades so she can join the army when she grew up. And sure enough, the moment she graduates, she signs herself up for basic training. Rainbow Dash would have been much like how she is in the pony world initially, an optimistic woman with a fierce attitude and passion alike. However, after Rainbow Dash has a good few sessions with flight, her cutie mark begins to form. She's extremely talented at flight, so it's not difficult for people to pinpoint what exactly her cutie mark means. As such, before Rainbow Dash can properly rise the ranks and prove her talent, she's repositioned into a group called the Wonderbolts, an elite group of cutie-marked flight pilots. Naturally, Rainbow Dash would have been a big fan of them originally. She would have watched all of their interviews and promotional videos and would have been ecstatic to join. After all, who wouldn't want to join the group of their idols? Everyone would take up that opportunity, and Rainbow Dash would have been no different. Of course, this is where she begins to see the real world. Rainbow Dash, even if she wouldn't be able to admit it, grew up privileged. Her parents never struggled for money and were able to fund whatever sports or activities she got into, including the private school she went to and a safe neighborhood. Rainbow Dash did work to earn her position, but she never had a glimpse of the true struggle until she was thrown into war. Equestria would be a relatively safe place to stay, but there would still be the need to send troops out to other parts of the world to help them through war, and that's where Rainbow Dash would have been sent. This likely would have been somewhere like the Crystal Empire and would have happened during the King Sombra arc. This sudden jump in both ranking and responsibilities would have been extremely overwhelming, and made worse by the helplessness Rainbow Dash would have felt in the situation. Combine this with finding out that the Wonderbolts are flyers behind the scenes who didn't choose this career in life either. They were roped into this group without really wanting it and can't back down now that so many people depend on them. The constant pressure and stress from this role would likely break Rainbow Dash down, and she would begin to resent her cutie mark. If she hadn't developed it, Rainbow Dash could have worked her way up naturally, and she wouldn't have been thrown into such a high position without working her way to earn it first. Rainbow Dash would have been assigned to work with Twilight after an incident where Twilight's lab would have been attacked for magic. Since Rainbow Dash has been taught defense and has a rare cutie mark much like Twilight, Celestia would have sent in a request to have one of the Wonderbolts temporarily positioned as Twilight's bodyguard. Rainbow Dash would have been chosen by the other Wonderbolts, since she's the youngest of them and still has a chance to make friends before she's completely sucked into this life. While Rainbow Dash and the other Wonderbolts are now extremely close from their trauma of war, none of them have anyone outside of the job, and the others would have all but begged Rainbow Dash to take this opportunity to make friends closer to her age. Thus, Rainbow Dash would have taken the request and would have temporarily stayed with Twilight Sparkle while Twilight would investigate this increase in magical activity. Rainbow Dash's arc would be reclaiming the life she lost, learning to cope with the things that she's seen, accepting that her cutie mark does make her different, and learning to separate her passion for flight apart from her job. Rainbow Dash would also have to learn how to depend on other people, as she's begun to bottle up her emotions to try and deal with her new life. I imagine her arc would also have Rainbow Dash going past her fears and contacting old friends she had in high school and training, and would be able to find comfort in this new life and herself and manage her guilt over her situation. Out of all the girls, Rainbow Dash would be the most distant from her pony counterpart. Her journey would work toward regaining enough comfort to be herself again, so Rainbow Dash would grow into being her pony persona bit by bit. I think her and Twilight would have been able to bond most without being punted into high-ranking roles over their cutie mark. I feel like she would first smile with Applejack during an arm wrestling competition, since Applejack would confront Rainbow Dash and would bring out the natural competitor within her. This would be a major moment in the story. And there's Rainbow Dash, easily the most traumatized of the bunch, with the biggest personality change as a result. Get this girl some therapy. Following the most traumatized girl of the bunch, here's the least traumatized girl. Farming-related cutie marks are so common compared to others that Applejack getting her cutie mark wasn't too shocking, especially since the Apple family has a long history of producing mark-bearing family members related to apples. Applejack would have hit the sweet spot where her cutie mark was still useful enough to warrant respect, since her family owns the best apple farm in the world, and her cutie mark wouldn't be so important as to disrupt her life. Applejack grew up relatively happy in her small town, without any worry for family love or friends, much less her future. Out of the group, Applejack is the only one who has a relatively normal life while still having her cutie mark. She got it when she was about 13, since she was old enough to start helping out with the fields around that time, so Applejack would have been at the prime age to understand her cutie mark. It's simple, straightforward, and overall she was quite pleased with it. Since the Apple family has a long standing with cutie marks passed down in every generation, studying their cutie marks would have been an obvious request put in by Twilight. Since Apple Bloom was too young and Big Macintosh would be busy with their yearly harvest and courting a pretty woman down the road, Applejack would decide to volunteer. The program would pay, and hey, Applejack wants to rebuild the barn house and get some new farm equipment. Applejack's role would primarily be the supportive type. She's a bit of a country bumpkin and doesn't realize that some people heavily struggle with their cutie marks and accepting them. After all, she's quite satisfied with hers. And sometimes Applejack would ignore boundaries and step on people's toes to try to push them towards being more comfortable with themselves and be braver. However, her honesty would force others to begin to accept who they are, and honestly, I feel like Applejack's presence would help jumpstart a lot of their character development. Applejack would have no demons to confront though. Her self-esteem is just fine, her family and social life is great, and she's content with who she is and what her future holds. The only issue Applejack would face related to the plot would be realizing that others don't function like her family does. So I've decided to change up the formula a bit. Applejack is the protagonist of the story. I understand that Twilight is supposed to be the protagonist, but since this would be an alternate universe adjacent to the pony one, it makes sense that the lead role could shift as well. And, frankly, I feel like Applejack would best fit this role. She's blunt and stubborn, but honest and encouraging. She would be the comfort the rest of the cast needs, and she would be the glue holding them all together in the beginning. And it allowed the audience a chance to get introduced into the world in a way Twilight wouldn't be able to provide just yet. Applejack would be the first to meet Twilight, and the rest would follow shortly. Twilight and Applejack grew up in the same town as well, so imagine there's a bit of history between the two. Applejack would have assumed Twilight left and never looked back because she thought she was too important for their tiny town, but she would later discover that Twilight didn't have many chances to come back. This would be the first slap of reality about cutie marks Applejack would discover, and as she learns more, so would the audience. And there's Applejack. I think her role as protagonist would be extremely vital to the story, along with her element of honesty. She's the most alike to her pony persona, just a step above Fluttershy. Following up the most alike cutie mark wise, here's the most different. Rarity. How you spite me so. I've drawn several sketches for her and redid several backstory ideas because none of it fit quite right. The general consensus people seem to agree upon is that Rarity is a fashion designer in the real world, but I digress. I don't think Rarity would translate to a fashion designer in our world, which, yeah, I get it. A weird idea, right? But look at the show. Rarity makes outfits for a species that doesn't have a need for clothing, much less fancy clothing. She targets such a small demographic of the population, the rich and privileged. Of course, there are fashion designers to target the 1% in the real world, but Rarity does it for a populace that primarily does not wear clothing. It's such a niche thing that feels overindulgent, if you would. Why would Rarity simply settle for clothes in our world if her pony version goes beyond and above? So, I'm keeping her cutie mark the same. Rarity is a fashion designer. Just for show ponies. Rarity grew up in a working class family, but her father was a photographer of high-end clients. Since her mother was a full-time worker, her father often would take Rarity to work with him, asking for her to stay in certain areas while he worked. Typically, this wouldn't be accepted, but her father has a camera cutie mark and is extremely talented in fashionable photo shoots. Thus, people tend to overlook him bringing his daughter to work. During one of these meetings at a client's mansion, Rarity was snuck out back because she saw their pony enclosure. Rich people tend to own ponies, so this wouldn't be an uncommon occurrence. So Rarity would often find herself out back playing with the ponies. She loves ponies and would often seek them treats through the fence. At those photo shoots as well, it wouldn't be difficult for leftover clothing to be found in the trash can from discarded outfits. If they weren't outright thrown away, sometimes Rarity would be given them for behaving. Obviously, Rarity wouldn't be able to wear the outfits, and her mother wasn't one for those styles, so Rarity would begin to test around with the fabrics and see what she could create. Eventually, she would get the idea to create a cute outfit for one of the ponies she visits. Obviously, this is an odd idea, but Rarity would do it regardless, and she finds that she quite enjoys it. The owners of the ponies would find it quite cute and allow for Rarity to be allowed into the pony pens in the future with adult supervision, so she doesn't get hurt. Whenever her father has to photograph this particular family, Rarity would always visit the ponies out back and get help from the keepers to put on accessories. These outfits were harmless and overall quite adorable. The biggest outfit would have been this glamorous dress inspired by gems that Rarity has been given from the owners of the ponies. The mother of the family would have found her outfits absolutely adorable and gave Rarity a few gems to try and make into an outfit. Her parents would have wanted to take these gems and convert them to cash to help pay bills, but Rarity managed to hide the gems and convert them into an outfit. This is when her cutie mark finally settles in, And while there is some confusion at first, the owner of the ponies manages to pinpoint the connection and offers to sponsor Rarity. And just like that, Rarity takes off. She begins to make outfits for ponies, and this suddenly becomes a massive boom in the rich industry. As Rarity grows, so does her influence, leading to her outfits being in high demand. By the time she leaves high school, she doesn't need the sponsorship from the family anymore, and has a mass of clients waiting for her talents. Rarity, however, only has a cutie mark for this specific niche of rich culture. Since Rarity begins to rank high within the rich world, her tastes begin to refine and her family's worth skyrockets. Rarity is all but sucked into this lifestyle while her parents do nothing to stop it, instead encouraging Rarity to help them all join the upper class. Her pony outfits become a staple in rich culture, and her shows showcasing these outfits become extremely difficult to get into due to high ticket prices. Of course, Rarity resents this. She hates all of it. Her cutie mark is so specific, and if she didn't get her cutie mark, none of this trend would have started, much less over something as stupid and time-wasting as outfits for show ponies. And because of this popularity spike, she never would have had the chance to enjoy her childhood, and her career was all but picked out for her. It's made worse by the fact that her parents begin to take trips left and right, leaving her alone with her younger sister while they spend her money for their vacations. Rarity can't grow to resent them though, as she knows that they had to work themselves to the bone to provide for their daughters. She still wishes that they were in her life and wishes that her cutie mark could be less specific. Rarity has been cast into such a specific genre of art that if she dared to venture out, she's terrified she'll lose the only attention she's ever gotten. Her cutie mark, which is so inherently stupid and pointless, is all that she has. Providing specific entertainment for the rich who only wanted their ponies to look nice, with nothing better to do than waste their money. Rarity's high-class personality is nothing more than a front she uses to blend in with the crowds. She secretly hates it but can't help to relish in their attention as well. By the time Twilight's study would have picked up, Rarity would have agreed to go with a small part of her that clung to the hope that she has something more in her than just some simple show pony shows for the rest of her life. Rarity's journey would be fighting against all the pressures in her life that led her to this job. She wouldn't have to accept that, just because of her special talent in a specific niche, that she doesn't have to dedicate her entire existence to it. Learning to love herself and her cutie mark, and that she can do whatever she wants to do. I imagine that Applejack would help Rarity learn how to say no to the rich jerks who keep pressuring her to create more and more useless clothing. And that's Rarity. A pony clothing making girl with a dream for more passionate endeavors. Rarity would eventually end up using the money she's earned to open several fashion stores, and would employ hopeful young fashion designers with a chance to grow and allow them to discover their own dreams. Rarity wouldn't be exceptional at human clothing, but she would be able to pick it up from her previous experience and would be comfortable simply running the business and occasionally making products. Rarity would learn to follow her dreams, even if her dreams didn't fully match what Destiny had set out to do. And this would also demonstrate how the cutie marks are a bit too dependent on the pony versions of the girls as well. Okay, final conclusion. My eyes are burning like the 7 layers of hell, but by God am I getting through this script. That's all of them and my story rewrite. Originally this was supposed to just be a small redesign, but then I got too excited and here we are now. I'm not sure why I would define this AU just yet, but it would have a primary focus around the cutie marks in the human world. The human world would go through its entire own story with the girls learning to appreciate themselves and learning more about the world of magic before they would realize that there's an alternate dimension connected to them through the Everfree Forest. And as they would realize it, this would be around the time the ponies would discover it as well. The second movie would be the focus of the two worlds overlapping and when Twilight would enter her human body. However, magic fully persists in the human world. When Pony Twilight would enter her body, all of her pony magic would go with her. This would provide a lot of plot. Not only would both versions of Twilight have to cope with the new world that they were both switched into, the magic would slowly deteriorate the human's body. After all, humans are not built to withstand the amount of magic an Alicorn has. If Applejack or the rest of the ponies switched, their human bodies would only ache and strain. However, when Twilight accidentally causes both versions of her to switch bodies, the human body would be on an unknown countdown until she starts showing signs of sickness. And in the meantime, the pony version would have to find ways to deal with threats to her kingdom without any access to Alicorn magic. That would be the basic overview of the entire plot if I wrote these movies. Of course, I didn't, so instead of having an interpersonal journey between girls discovering self-acceptance and learning how two worlds so different may depend on one another, we instead got a show about a singing annoying orange. May God bless our souls. We don't need 2 of those. Equestria Girls isn't all bad. Sunset Shimmer is a cool character. The sirens actually dominate the movie they're in. literally and figuratively, and some of the songs are bops. However, my cutie mark is complaining, so I'm destined to do nothing but whine until shows are exactly designed the way I want them, and that my way is clearly better, despite me having no experience to claim otherwise. I mean, they've only written and animated like 9 seasons for a show and have gotten high success in several spin-off movies, while I once read about 2 paragraphs of a Fluttercord fanfic. Clearly, we are not the same, Hasbro. Your move.